Thank you. Yes, I would have liked to give a paper on the mystagogical psychology of St. Maximus, but since we are only allowed to give one paper, and Paul asked me to present something about our experience in Western Europe, no mystagogical psychology, but the mundane work of setting up a institution in Amsterdam, where our institution is, I think, the Benjamin of the institutions, because our age is 10 years now. What I want to do is to give you a small overview of our history, so you know what we're doing, our challenges, to look with you at the challenges in Western Europe of parishes, and from there go to the clergy we need, from there to the profile of the clergy we would like to have as students, and then look at the education needed for these students. So start with the parish and end with the education. But first, some preliminary remarks about the Amsterdam Center of Orthodox Theology. 10 years ago, a friend of mine said, you have to talk to the dean of the theological faculty of the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, because he would be very interested to speak to the Orthodox. They already have the Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, and, well, since you also are very exotic, it would be very good to have you as well. So the first question he asked me, who are you? Who are the Orthodox? And whom should we talk to when we want to talk to the Orthodox? And this is a continuous challenge. Who are the Orthodox? In Amsterdam, the area where the university is based is also the area where most of the Jews live. So if my son, my eldest son is called David, so when he was smaller, when I called him David, you saw the Jews looking, is he one of us or not? So one of the first things was to make clear what the Orthodox are. So we started with Eastern Orthodox to make sure that they understand we're not Orthodox Muslim, not Orthodox Protestant, not Orthodox Jew. So we sort of have to claim the name of Orthodox, and that's why we write it with a capital. In Dutch you can also write it as an adjective, but then it has a negative connotation, very negative connotations. So this is a continuous challenge in our situation, so just the name. So the dean said, well, look, in Holland, because of we have so many Muslims and the populists, they don't like the Muslims, and they especially don't like them to be educated in Saudi Arabia. So in order to be educated in Holland, the Muslims have funding for education to have local imams. But since they have this possibility, then of course the others also have the right to have this funding. So he pointed out to me the road how to receive government funding, because that's really fundamental. So my next visit was to the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Justice, because since Napoleonic times, the Minister of Justice is also the minister responsible for, let's say, religious affairs. And there, the same question, who are the Orthodox? We have a fake notion, long services, men with beards, but who are you? And whom to talk to? And that was, let's say, one of the first challenges or part of the master plan, is what we had to do is to establish a common Orthodox organ for representation, because it was not there. We had all these separate dioceses, but not one single organ. And a great breakthrough was Chambéry, when Episcopal Conference was established for the Benelux, so for the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, because this established an organ, and we instituted an organ for Holland as a representative. So it was a lot of work to organize all of this, because this is needed, because the government says we want to speak with one voice. And there was the other big problem. The government said Orthodox, but there are two flavors of Orthodox, as far as we know, because there's another group, the Oriental, we believe, and we are prepared to open the door for, let's say, a third Christian group, but only one flavor, not two flavors. That's far too complicated. In our eyes, you look the same, you do the same things, so we want only one Orthodox representative body. And this has taken, let's say, 10 years of diplomacy to establish this. And I must say, I'm very happy that it's only 3 weeks ago that at last an agreement was signed between the Orthodox Church in the Netherlands, which is the Eastern Orthodox, and the representative body of the Oriental Orthodox to work together and have a common organ. So the Eastern Orthodox, that's Okin, and the Oriental Orthodox are Sokin. And it took the Greek Metropolitan to receive the blessing from His Holiness Bartholomew in order to work together, because it's especially the Greeks who have big problems with the Orientals. For the Russians and others, it's less complicated. So this was needed, because otherwise the government says, who are the Orthodox? And we want only one voice. So that was a very important step. So all this was going on while in the first phase we didn't have any government funding. And in my experience, especially in the European context, it's not viable to have an Orthodox institution with only contributions from the community. It doesn't work. And the experience of the Cambridge Institute and now Saint-Serge in Paris is that it's very, very difficult to survive on your own and only with contributions from your own communities. So we really need government funding. That was my conclusion after a few years of fundraising. Fortunately, Father Andrew Louth retired from Durham and was willing to come over, cross the channel, and help us out. So for the first 4 years, it was Father Andrew who came on a regular basis, and he was also prepared to accept doctoral students. And that is an interesting part of the finances, because finances is really the big worry all the time. It's the greatest challenge. In Holland, universities are partly based on the number of PhD theses defended. So that means you earn by having PhD theses. So in our case, it's interesting to have external PhD students. So we started, let's say, at the highest level, at the PhD level, with Father Andrew. And actually in 3 weeks, Father Alexandros Chouliaras from Athens will defend his thesis, which was supervised by Father Andrew. So once we have this going, this will give us a supply of money, because every PhD thesis gives you money, which is an interesting part of the Dutch system, which you have to use, of course. A big step forward was when 3 years ago the Minister of Education granted us special funding. And then it was possible for me I was working in the police as a strategic advisor, to go to the university. Father Johan Lenna, who's also here, received a position in the field of liturgical studies, and the university was so impressed by the curriculum vitae of Father John Baer of St. Vladimir's, that through a special procedure, he was appointed to the chair, the Callistus Ware chair in Orthodox theology at VU. So he has a full chair, but it's part-time. It's 1 day a week, and he comes on a regular basis. It was interesting to see how interested in the West they are, the Orthodox. They're really interested, but they have no clue who we are. And especially if we are able to speak the language and stick to the procedures of academic standards of the West, they're very willing to accept us. So now there is 3 of us. We have basic funding, so we were sort of in the next phase. And part of our process of what I call emancipation is that we have the possibility to have chaplains in prison and in future also in the army. And this is all part of the recognition process. So because the Orientals and the Eastern Orthodox were willing to work together, now the government says, okay, we will fully recognize you. So last Tuesday, I had a talk with the Minister of Justice, and he said, well, you did all your homework, you can proceed. So we'll proceed to the next phase, and that is very important, is the possibility to offer our clergy to work as a chaplain in the army and also in the prison, because these are state salaries. So it's very important to offer this perspective of a part-time job as a chaplain. So this is part of the ongoing work, and so we're now proceeding to the next phase. Let us now turn to the parishes, because one part is, of course, all the diplomacy involved, church diplomacy, and, of course, the contacts with the state. The other is the position of the parishes in Western Europe, as far as I know in my experience, and they're more and more multi-ethnic. So the Amsterdam parish, where I am one of the 4 priests, we have more than 20 nationalities. That is our reality. Almost all parishes in Holland cannot support a priest, a salary priest. It's only actually our Amsterdam parish which can offer salaries. But most parishes don't have this possibility. So that's one reality we have to face. The other reality is that youth, parishioners, they have questions, very profound questions. So we need good clergy. I know also with the experience with the Orientals, the churches are full, but if the clergy is not familiar with the problems of the modern world, the youth, they will leave. And because we started from the very beginning with having students from both families, we know. Because we have a Coptic priest now, we have among the students Greek priests from Rotterdam, so we have this whole mixture, and I must say the experience of sitting together is really wonderful. Studying together Chalcedon, seeing that these labels, Monophysite and so on, these are all very easy ways of name calling, but the reality is much more complicated. So it's very interesting to sit together. If we move now to the clergy that is needed, I think what I call the St. Paul model is the way forward, at least in our conditions, is that you have to accept that most clergy need a secular job. They cannot work full time. Besides, I think it's even better that they have a job in the world. So I'm now talking with the Syrian bishop in Holland, and they're used, the Orientals, full-time priests. But they're now also thinking, maybe we should do differently. And the way in my parish, we have actually a team of 4 priests. And because we have our families, we can share the burden. So now I'm here, Father Johan, who's also a priest there, we're here. But fortunately, there are 2 other priests who can fill in tomorrow. So I think in our experience, it's very good to have a team. We also have 4 deacons, so we are very rich. The other parishes, they're looking and enviously because we have many. And also part of it is to involve the lay persons. You should not try to do it on your own. So actually our parish is, I guess, sometimes visitors say you're the last Suros parish in the sense of the experience also of the Moscow Council of 1917 is involving laypersons. So teams of part-time priests, I think that's in our situation works very, very well. And that also involves giving the perspective of a secular job. And why not as a chaplain in a hospital? It's at least close to the job you're doing in the parish. Now let's move to the profile of a student. Looking at the students we have, the Orientals, it's true that they send 18-year-olds. But when I look at the other students, so for instance, the Greek priest I mentioned in Rotterdam, he was a colonel in the Greek army. He was based at a NATO base in Holland, and then he had a talk with the Metropolitan, and he said, well, actually, my greatest wish, my calling, is to be a priest. So he was ordained a priest. But no religious education, no theological education, like many clergy in Western Europe. So he's now in our program. What you see then is if you look at these candidates, or he is already ordained, but these students, you see what the Latin, in the Latin tradition, is called a vir probatus, a mature person who already has a family, has already a job, is established in life. And I think in a parish, these people are very needed. So you have people with already a lot of acquired competences, who've read a lot. And in accepting them, we also have to award them the credits for what they have already done. So it's a different kind of student. So I'm also saying to the faculty is that we're not expecting 18-year-olds. We're expecting people who already have a lot and for whom we have to make a portfolio and see that you have done this and this, that area you should do something else. But it's a totally different way of acquiring clergy than these 18-year-olds. And I'm wondering whether this model of a seminary with these 18-year-olds, whether we took this over from the Catholics, but I'm wondering how Orthodox it is to have these 18-year-olds, put them together for a few years, and then throw them out into the world, and they encounter problems they have never heard of. I remember we had a session on of all places, the island of Mykonos. I was before on Mount Athos, and the monk said, that's the place where the devil lives. And we had a session, Metropolitan Callisus was also there, about spiritual direction and confession. And Metropolitan Hilarion of the Moscow Patriarchate, he was then a higher monk, he said, look, I was 23 years old. I was a monk, I was ordained a priest, and next day I had to hear on end, 4 hours on end, confessions. I had no clue what some of the things people were talking about, what they were meaning. So this is not recommendable for a parish. So what we have to deal with, if we move to the kind of education, is to look personalized education, and through online, if it's possible online. Actually, this morning I recorded a video and uploaded it for our students. During the course of these days, we have this electronic learning environment and we engage each other. And when we have our intensive, we have a flipped classroom. The students present. Why listen to us? They can listen to us on a video. So it's true, we have to use online education in a very good way, and the time we spend together, use it wisely. So these are some of the challenges we have in education. Of course, there is time for, let's say, old school education, and that's what's happening in the Master's Spiritual Care at our university, because they're Buddhists, Muslims, Orthodox, they study together, because that's the reality of their job when they work in prison or in the army. Your colleagues will be Muslims, and you have to work together with them. So you have to know something about their tradition. So we were sending our students there now as well. So to sum up, in our case, for funding, we need a government, and we're closely cooperating with them. And in our case, as in the case in Sweden, there I see some of our Swedish friends, we have the similar experience of St. Ignatius. We need to work with the government, and they're really prepared to work with us, and especially with St. Ignatius, because we complement each other. You have more the Oriental expertise. We are more in the Eastern Orthodox field. Let's work together. So, for instance, Eritrean students, why try to build capabilities in that field? We sent them to Sweden. So we really have to work together because you cannot survive on your own. So let's leave it at that.